Hi guys, it's Tim G5TM. Now, I'm a big fan of the multi-band doublet. I've made quite a few videos about it in the past, and I'm a big fan. I like using ladder line. I like the low loss. I like the sort of flexibility it gives you. Just using one dipole gives you many bands. Feed it with ladder line, low loss, a reasonable tuner and a balun or a really good balanced tuner, and away you go. Now, I've heard many comments and received many comments in the past and read lots of stuff on forums and heard advice from people say, well, you have to use ladder line all the way to a balanced tuner. Now, let's be honest about it. It is far less lossy and it's probably the preferable way, no doubt about it, to feed a doublet. But how much coax can we get away with if we're going to be introducing coax into the feed line of a doublet we're trying to use on several bands? What can we get away with? Well, I just thought, just for giggles, I would model a 120-foot doublet. Now, what's that in meters? Oh, Lord, about 35 meters or something, isn't it? 36 meters, something like that. So apologies for the guys using metrics there, but it's about 36 meters long, 120 feet, okay? An inverted V, typical sort of dipole or doublet, of course, whatever you want to call it. We'll call it a doublet, by the way, just for the semantics of this video. A typical sort of size doublet that people have in their back garden if they've got a reasonable size garden, okay? I don't even have that size. So I thought I'd model it and then just try some different lengths of coax in conjunction with the ladder line to see what we can get away with and what sort of losses we're seeing. Now, I chose the length at random. I hadn't sort of played around to get a good match in any band. I said, well, I'm just going to go with 120 feet to see what we can see. As it turns out, we get a much better match on 10 meters in terms of inherent loss with the ladder line than we do on 80. But that's just the way it is. Sometimes that's just the length of wire we have to play with and the garden we have to play with. So let's just go with it and let's see what we've got. So first of all, let's take a look at the parameters and what antenna we're dealing with here. So 120-foot doublet inverted V, fed with standard commercial, normal 18 AWG, 450 ohm ladder line. The stuff you'll buy at any sort of emporium, okay? The apex is at 10 meters above the ground, that's about 32 feet, and the end's about 7.5 meters above ground. What's that, about 24, 25 feet or something? The bands under analysis, we're looking at 80 meters, which is obviously the lowest band we're probably going to use this antenna for. I guess, look, you could press into service on top band, but let's go with 80 meters because we're not far short of a sort of half wave, really. And 10 meters, but no people use it for 6 meters, but let's go with 10 meters as the highest HF band, really. That, it is the highest HF bands. That's what we're basing on. So we're going from the bottom to the top in terms of sort of frequency range for this kind of antenna, typically. And the question now, as we got here, look, is if we use coax as part of the ladder line, or as part of the feed line, really, does this greatly affect the performance of a multi-band doublet? So that should be if we use coax as part of the feed line, okay? Does this greatly affect the performance of a multi-band doublet? So let's have a look. What I thought we'd look at first of all is we just look at what the losses are purely on the ladder line. Now, I'm using 60 feet of ladder line here, 450 ohm, okay? And at that point, I'll then attach it to a one-to-one current balun. We're assuming that'll produce a perfect sort of transformation of the impedance at the end. We're just going with that. And we're not bringing into this, by the way, any tuner or balun losses. We're just going with the feed line here. So we've got to factor those in as well. But we're just going with the feed line for now. So we're looking at the attenuation. That's the loss on the 450 ohm ladder line, 60 feet of it on 80 and 10. And then we'll have a starting point, okay? So let's have a look at 80 meters. So you can see there, look, on the system I've used, if you look at the left-hand side, it says the loss on 80 meters is 1.6 dB. Okay, so 60 feet of ladder line, 450 ohm on 80 meters, the loss is 1.6 dB. The reason why that is because that combination of the length of the antenna and the ladder line happens to give us a bit of an issue in terms of the extra loss on the feed line. If we'd adjusted the length of the ladder line up or down, or if we'd lengthened or shortened the antenna, we'd probably manage to negate some of that. But as I say, we've just got what we've got, and this is what it's like, isn't it? So looking back at this then, you can see on the bottom left of the screen in yellow, you've got two figures. you've got the R and X figures there that MMA is suggesting is going to be at the feed point. And that's been put into the, if you can see the square there with all the numbers in it, that little sort of diagram we've got there. You can see towards the top of it, you've got those same numbers for R and X there. And what that then does is produce towards the bottom in yellow, the very bottom figure, 1.6 dB of attenuation. Most of that, as you can see, is about 1.45 dB of reflected power. Okay, so that's probably where the issue is. Now, if we look at 10 meters, same length of 450 ohm, the loss on 10 meters is 0.5 dB. Got less of an issue here. And again, you can see the impedance at the feed point there. Now, that's fine. Those are the figures there, no problem. That's our starting point. What is interesting, if I show you this one, is how we work out the impedance at the far end of the ladder line, not at the feed point, at the far end, okay? And that's what this program allows us to do. And let me show you how I've done it. So on the left-hand side, you can see step 1. Now, step 1, we input those same numbers from MMA into those boxes on the top part of the diagram there in yellow. You can see they're the same numbers. And then when we do that, then we also factor in the length of the feed line and what feed line we're using. It then gives us how that transforms the impedance at the very end of the ladder line where it goes into the balun, where we're effectively attaching the coax to it via the balun, okay? And you can see what the figures are there. So that's what the coax is seeing, and that's what the coax is having to handle in terms of the transformation at the end of the ladder line. So we're trying to make this as realistic as we possibly can. Okay then, so let's then have a look at 80 meters then, and let's see what this is telling us. So on the left-hand side of the two tables, we're using RG213, and we're comparing the loss of using a different lengths of RG213. So let's pretend your shack is at the house and your antenna is at the bottom end of the garden, right? And you can't bring that ladder line in. The only thing you can do is bring the ladder line down to a certain point, you attach it to a balun, and then you've got the coax plugged into the balun, and you run that coax all the way back to the shack. So going back to the table on the left, you can see on the far left-hand column, we're dealing with 80 meters, 3.75 megahertz. And underneath that, the first thing we're using that same 60-foot length of ladder line and 50 foot of RG213. It's about 15 meters worth of RG213. You can see the combined loss is about 6.7 dB, right? If we just use 450 ohm all the way in, the 110 feet of, as it is there, 60 and 50 is 110, all the way in the 450 ohm, we'd have a loss of 2 dB. So we're 4.7 dB down using that 50 foot of RG213, right? If we go to the one below, now we're using 100 feet of RG213. And our loss has gone up now to 8.3 dB with that same 60 foot length of ladder line as well with it. And if we'd use just ladder line for the 160 foot run, we've got a loss of 3.1, so we're nearly 5 dB worse off now using that length of RG213 in conjunction with the ladder line. And the one below that is of a 150 foot run of RG213, so we're really pushing it now. And our combined loss is now 10.5 dB compared to 3.3 dB. So if we'd run, 210 foot of ladder line, and that gives, we're now worse off by 7 dB. So okay, obviously, as we've got longer runs of coax, there's a high SWR on that coax. Hasn't reached the tuner yet. The tuner's in the shack by your radio, okay? And we've got some major, quite substantial loss there. Now, if we go to the right-hand table, we're using LMR 600. This is a bit different. You can see the figures are a little bit better. So the top one again there, it's still using 80 meters, 60 feet of ladder line, 50 feet of LMR 600. Really thick stuff now. Our combined loss is a lot less. It's 3.8 dB. We're only a couple of dB worse off now than running all the ladder line to the shack. And then if we go to 100 feet of LMR 600 with the ladder line, we're on 6 dB loss. Again, we're about 2.5 dB better off than using the RG213, but we're still 3 dB worse off than using ladder line all the way. And if we go to the bottom one, but 60 feet of ladder line and 150 foot of LMR 600, we're now at 6.5 dB. And that's just over 3 dB worse off than using the ladder line all the way. So I think the lesson here is if you're going to have to use a run of coax out to the ladder line effectively via the balun, all the way into the shaft to the tuner. You've got to make sure it's really, really good low loss coax, because this is 80 meters, okay? Which traditionally isn't too harsh if we have some high SWR, but obviously we're dealing on our coax, but obviously we're dealing with quite high figures here. Let's carry on. Let's look now at 10 meters, the 10 meter band. And you can see again, if we look back here at the figures for RG213, we've got some similar situation happening here. Again, on the left-hand column, using RG213, our combined loss with 50 foot of RG213, 60 feet of ladder line is nearly 4.5 dB. We're about 3.5 dB worse than the 450 ohm. We've used 100 foot of RG213 with the ladder line. We're 4.5 dB nearly worse off than using 450 ohm. And we've got a loss of 8 dB with 150 feet of RG213. And we're 6.5 dB worse off than the 450 ohm. LMR 600 is a lot kinder and a lot closer actually to using 450 ohm. The reason being is because, at the end of the day, it's far lower loss at higher frequencies than the RG213 would be. Also, don't forget at the start I mentioned that just with this length of doublet and length of feed line, the 450 ohm ladder line, we do actually have a kinder sort of match, if you like, to 10 than we do to 80 meters, just how it is. But at the end of the day, look, even with those figures, as we can see there for LMR 600 on 10 meters, we're still seeing quite a reasonable difference, especially with that 150 foot run of LMR 600. We're still 3.5 dB worse off than running that ladder line all the way into the tuner. So, not majorly surprising numbers there, I guess. But if you do have, if you suffer from a big garden, how can you suffer from a big garden as a radio amateur? But if you do have a big garden and you need to run that coax all the way, just be careful about your choice of coax, okay? And if you need to do that, well, maybe give thought to maybe running a remote tuner out there. That would save you, could save you a fair bit of loss. There'll be a bit of loss with the tuner as well as the balun, but certainly nothing compared to what we've got here. Now, and of course, one other thing, it does all depend as well on what sort of impedance your ladder line is bringing you at the end of it when you attach that balun effectively to it, because it all depends on the length of your antenna and the length of your ladder line. It's a bit of pot luck really when it comes to doublets. You just got to have to see what's there. Anyway, let's have a look. Let's carry on. And the question is though, can we run a short run of coax between the balun and the tuner? Because sometimes what we can do with a doublet, we can bring the ladder line effectively to just outside the shack, say on a wall outside, and we run a short bit of coax from the balun into the shack and into the tuner. So you almost bring the ladder line all the way in. Now, for some people, bringing ladder line into the shack can be problematic for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, some people view, I think, ladder line as being something that would bring a lot of RF into the shack. Some people have had bad experiences with it. It couples with wiring. It doesn't have the shielding, of course, that coax does. So we do have that issue. You can't run it on the floor, for example. You can't put it too close to a wall for too long, and putting it next to sort of metallic surfaces, guttering, that kind of thing isn't a good idea. So with that in mind, lots of people come to the sort of arrangement where they have a balun on the wall outside, they run the ladder line to it, and then they've got coax coming down or into the shack. Now, lots of people on forums and lots of people with lots of experience say that is probably something you shouldn't do. It'll really affect the performance of the doublet. But does it affect it by a lot? So what I've done, I've taken the same antenna, and now I've modelled running the ladder line almost into the shack, but having the balun on the wall. And let's see what sort of run of coax we can get away with on both 10 and 80 meters. Let's take a look. So first of all, we're looking at 80 meters here, and we're running the coax from the balun to the tuner. Same frequency, 3.75 megahertz. Now on the left-hand side, I've got different lengths of coax in feet. So we've got 1 foot, 3 foot, which is about a meter, 6 foot, which is 2 meters, and so on. And you can see there, look, this is the same antenna, by the way. We're running the ladder line, basically 60 feet of ladder line. We're saying we're a bit closer now to the antenna. We can run 60 feet to the outside wall. What sort of loss have we got? Well, even with RG58, look, effectively, we've got less than half a dB of loss on 80 meters up to about 10, maybe 12 feet, probably about 4 meters of ladder line or so. And in fact, up to about 15, 16 feet, which is 5 meters of it, we've still got less than a dB of loss. So not a disaster at all. When we use the really thick stuff, you can see that effectively, when we're looking at LMR 400, LMR 600, that's at 0.00 because basically it's rounded down to that. But there's obviously a tiny bit of attenuation there. But, you know, that sort of small length of coax at such a low frequency like 80 meters, you don't got to worry too much about it at all. RG213 does a decent job as well, as you can see from the table there. To be perfectly honest with you, apart from that 20-foot run on RG58, and if you want to keep it under a dB on RG213, we haven't got much to worry about at all. If you use a fairly, say if you've got 10 feet of run, for example, and you're using an LMR 400, not a problem, is there? Okay, so 80 meters looks pretty kind. Now, if we go to 10 meters, this is where we could have a problem. So, and don't forget, when we looked at the antenna just now on 10 meters, we had quite a kind match on there, really. We got a bit lucky with our 120 feet doublet and 60 feet of ladder line. Now, even with that in mind, we've still got a challenger. So let's go back to this table. You can see, look, suddenly, if we're going to stick to using RG58 and we're going to run 10 feet of it, suddenly we're losing, I should say, nearly 2 dB on 10 meters. And in fact, if you're running 10 feet or more, really use the really big, thick stuff if you can. LMR 400, LMR 600, certainly that sort of territory there. Why am I bothered about a dB? Well, don't forget, two things we haven't factored into this yet. We haven't factored in Balun loss, and we haven't factored in losses in terms of the tuner as well. So you want to try and keep as much as you can that loss, which you will have because you'll have a varying range of impedances and SWR figures to deal with, a lot of them quite high on that run of coax. And the higher in frequency you go, of course, once you go to 12, 15, 17 meters, 10 meters, it's going to matter more and more. So the bottom line is on 10 meters, it does matter a lot more, as this table shows us. And in fact, really, if you've got like a 10, 12 foot run of coax coming in, you don't really want to go worse than more lossier than LMR 400 or Hyperflex 10 or whatever it's going to be, the similar sort of stuff. And really, the thicker, the better. However, if you can keep the run down to 10 feet or less, which is about 3 meters, and you can use, say something like LMR 600, the really big, thick stuff, the good stuff, then a loss, as it says there on the table on that table of 0.6 dB, basically, it's absolutely nothing to worry about. You know, even a dB and a half isn't the worst. But if you do want to use a fair run of it, 20 feet, about 6 meters, and you're using RG58 on 10 meters, as we can see here, then you're losing 3 dB, which is beginning to be a little bit something we should be trying to avoid, because that's half your power, isn't it? So, you know, in summary then, what are we saying here? Well, what we're saying here effectively is, if you're using mega long runs of coax, 50 feet or more, before you even introduce a tuner into a multi-band doublet, you will incur loss. And if you have to do that, and sometimes you have to because of your domestic situation, your garden, things in the way, whatever it is, then the bottom line is use really low loss coax. You have to, okay? Otherwise, it's going to be quite a compromise. However, the other thing that people say in that if you use a short run of coax, 15, 20 feet or less from a balun where the ladder line outside the house where the ladder line hits the balun and you then run the coax from the balun into the tuner, a lot of people say that's a massive compromise. Well, it can be, but only if you're using very skinny coax. If you're using LMR 400, LMR 600 or the like, even on 10 meters, the chances are you're not going to have too much of an issue in terms of performance. As long as your tuner can match what you've got there, and as long as your balun's a nice chunky one that can handle a wide range of impedances, because some can and some can't, right? In fact, you're going to spend a lot of money on two things here with this system. Spend a lot of money on your coax and spend a lot of money on your balun if you're not making it yourself, of course. So in summary then, what are we saying? Try and avoid long runs of coax before a tuner with a doublet. If you're using a long coax run and you cannot bring the ladder line close to the shack, why not think about a remote tuner? If you're not going to use a remote tuner, use the very best coax possible to minimize the losses. Relatively short runs of coax between the balun and the tuner don't cause great losses. With care, you should be able to keep this at less than a dB, worse than using ladder line the whole way. Although take care on the higher HF bands, 15, 12 and 10 for example. And get the best balun you can afford, okay? Because not all 1-to-1 or 4-to-1 baluns are the same. And we used just 1-to-1 in this example. Some people prefer 4-to-1s. Whatever floats your boat or whatever works for you. Anyway, hope that was of interest to you. I thought I'd have a look at that because, as I say, lots of people have that conundrum. Do we use long runs of coax? Do we not? But I hope that's of use to you. And if you want to click subscribe and join the board, it'd be lovely to have you to join us on the channel. And please put your comments down, what your own experiences even, and thoughts are of this situation. 7-3, stay safe, and thanks for watching. All the best now. Bye-bye.